For $50, a lonely cowboy bought a ranch and was shocked to find 3 native girls who were waiting to reveal his father's terrifying sin. The first bullet screamed past Caleb Rhodes' ear, close enough that he felt the heat stir the dust on his worn black hat. The second hammered into the thick leather of his saddlebag, not an inch from his hip, sending a spray of splintered wood and canvas into the unforgiving Arizona air. He didn't flinch, didn't even drop the reins. Instead, the only movement was the grim, mechanical count in his mind. 1, 2. By the time the third shot rang out a dull thud from a low-caliber rifle, Caleb had already brought his sturdy Dunmare, Dust, into a hard, sideways pivot behind a fractured slab of red rock. The action was as quick and practiced as drawing breath, a movement learned not in youth, but forged in the inferno of 1,000 close calls, both during the war between the states and in the 7 desolate years that followed. His Winchester Model 1873 was already pressed against his shoulder, the sight aligned with the shimmering heat above the scrub brush. He never hurried. He never needed to. Hurrying was how a man with nothing left to lose lost the only thing he still possessed, his quiet, self-inflicted misery. The shooter was perched on a low ridge, barely visible against the crimson backdrop of the distant Red Rock Canyon. Amateur mistake. He had positioned himself in the shadow of a brittle, dry cedar, but the brush around him was moving, twitching with the slight tremor of a held breath. Nate, no. Caleb inhaled the sharp, dry desert air, held it in his lungs for a long, silent beat, then released half of it in a measured sigh. His fingers squeezed the cold steel trigger. The distant figure jerked violently, then tumbled down the incline like a sack of unwanted grain, his rifle scattering into the dust. One down. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway to keep more Wild West love stories coming. Oh, Martha, my love, my life, if you could see me now. Stuck between the cold steel I've come to crave and the warmth of a new, unexpected danger. This life I've chosen, this dust-filled path of sorrow, was meant to lead only to the end. Yet here I stand, caught by a final, desperate plea from the only man who still saw the ghost of the one you love. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, but this road, this dusty track to Red Rock, is paved with my failures, my unending grief, and the bitter knowledge that your love was the last true light I will ever know. I chase shadows, and the only comfort is the bitter poetry of my own undoing. Movement to his left, a rash, impulsive charge caught his eye. The second pursuer, riding with more courage than common sense, was coming fast. Caleb worked the lever, chambered another round with a practiced snick, and swung the barrel toward the approaching threat. The man was close enough now that Caleb could see the sun-bleached blonde stubble on his chin, the cheap, stained cotton bandana covering his lower face, and the desperate, wild certainty in his eyes. Caleb's second shot hit the man square in the chest. He staggered in the saddle, riding another 3 steps through sheer momentum, his mouth opening in a silent, surprised gasp before he pitched forward, collapsing face first into the burning alkali dust. Silence, vast and absolute, settled over the desert landscape, broken only by the mournful, high-pitched call of a distant hawk circling an unseen quarry and Caleb's own measured, shallow breathing. He waited. A minute. 2 minutes. Counting to 60 twice over, the long silence, a familiar companion. Only when absolutely certain no other threats remained did he step out from the cover of the rock. A wave of white-hot pain lanced through his left shoulder, dragging him back from the adrenaline-fueled clarity of the fight. Looking down, he noticed a dark, blossoming stain spreading across the gray cotton of his shirt and soaking into the heavier fabric of his duster. The first bullet, the one he thought had only grazed him, had done more damage than he'd initially allowed himself to feel. Nothing immediately fatal. He'd walked away from worse back in Tennessee, but it would need tending. And soon, fever was a quiet killer in the desert, slower and more insidious than a bullet. He approached the nearest body, his rifle still ready, the buttstock resting lightly on his hip. The man was face down, blood pooling beneath him, staining the thirsty earth, a deep, unwelcome color. Using the toe of his worn boot, Caleb turned the body over, studying the features for any recognition. Just another hard-faced drifter, likely hired out of some dusty saloon in Santa Fe for a one-time, no-questions-asked job. The killing of Caleb Rhodes, the man they used to call the Hawk. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to shorten his miserable existence. He knelt, wincing as the motion pulled at his wounded shoulder, and began to search the man's pockets. A few worn dollars, a cheap brass pocket watch, a handful of ammunition standard drifter fare. But then his hand froze, pulling a folded piece of heavy, quality paper from the inside pocket of the dead man's vest. The paper was thick, aged stock, sealed with wax that had been broken and resealed and broken again. What caught Caleb's eye, however, was the name written on the outside in a sprawling, elegant script: Caleb Rhodes. A letter addressed to him, carried by a man sent to kill him. Caleb stood slowly, backing away from the corpse, his eyes fixed on the letter, a heavy, sinking sense of dread settling in his gut. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as he broke the seal. The handwriting was agonizingly familiar, though shakier than he remembered, the letters more spindly. "Caleb," the note began, "if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I bought the Red Rock place 5 years ago with the gold you sent me. Yes, I kept it, despite your furious instructions to use it all on yourself. I knew someday you'd need a place to call home, even if you didn't know it yet. The property is north of the old Spanish Trail, nestled where the red mesas first rise from the flats toward the painted desert. You'll know it by the 3 ancient, twisted cedars standing sentinel at the front gate. I need you to come. A final vow awaits you here, one that might just give you what you've been searching for since Martha died. The deed is in your name, but there is far more to this legacy than land. Your friend until the end, Elias Blackthorne." Caleb's hand trembled slightly as he folded the letter and tucked it into his own pocket, right over the spreading stain on his shirt. Elias Blackthorne. They had fought side by side at Antietam, saved each other's lives more times than either could count. 2 broken men on opposite sides who found a strange, mutual respect in the midst of blood and chaos. After the war, they had gone their separate ways. Thorne, the gentle giant who had once been a preacher, to find peace and a quiet life. Caleb, the ruthless sharpshooter, to find something else entirely. Absolution, perhaps, or maybe just a quicker, more decisive end that didn't involve putting the cold steel of his revolver in his own weary mouth. He looked down at the dead man again, and understanding a cold, sickening clarity clicked into place. These weren't random bounty hunters who had simply stumbled across his trail. They'd been sent to intercept him, to ensure he never reached Thorne's ranch, which meant whatever was waiting for him there, this final vow was valuable enough that someone wanted desperately to prevent his arrival. Caleb returned to his horse, Dust, the sturdy dun mare that had carried him faithfully for 3 hard, silent years. The animal nickered softly as he approached, sensing the distress and the metallic tang of blood in the air. "Looks like we've got a destination after all, old girl," Caleb murmured, swinging himself stiffly into the saddle despite the sharp protest from his wounded shoulder. He sat still for a long moment, the weight of the letter heavy in his pocket, heavier than the burden of his rifle. 7 years had passed since Martha died in his arms, the life fading from her eyes as the fever, or was it the despair, claimed her. 7 years of drifting, taking jobs that put him squarely in the path of bullets, hoping one might eventually find its mark and bring his misery to an end. His hand unconsciously moved to the silver wedding band he still wore beneath his glove. Before the light had faded from Martha's eyes, she had made him promise to find his way back to being a man who could build a home, not just destroy them. 7 years, and he still hadn't found a way to keep that promise. Maybe, just maybe, Elias Thorne had found the beginning of a path for him. Caleb turned Dust northward, toward the red-hued cliffs of the Red Rock Canyon and the mountains beyond, toward whatever final promise his old friend had left for him. The landscape grew more rugged as Caleb rode north. Flat, scrub-covered plains gave way to rolling hills of sandstone and juniper, which in turn yielded to the first craggy foothills of the mesas. The air cooled slightly with the elevation, a welcome relief from the merciless Arizona heat. His shoulder throbbed with each rhythmic hoofbeat, a pulsing drumbeat of fever and pain. He'd done what he could with it, cleaned the entry wound with the last of his cheap trail whiskey, and packed it with a strip of relatively clean cloth torn from his duster lining. But it desperately needed proper tending. Fever was setting in. He could feel the unnatural warmth in his skin, the slight cloudiness in his thoughts, making the edges of the world feel dangerously soft. As the third day of riding dawned, casting the mesas in deep, bloody shadows, Caleb spotted a weathered, bleached wooden sign half hidden by overgrown mesquite brush. Red Rock Trail, 5 miles. He was close. His mind drifted as he rode, memories surfacing unbidden in the fever haze. Elias Thorne had been different from the other men in their regiment. Union blue, not Confederate gray, yet they had been bound by something deeper than politics. Thorne was quieter, more thoughtful. While others spent their nights gambling and drinking whatever rotgut they could find, Elias would often be found writing long, heartfelt letters to his wife, or reading one of the small, leather-bound books he somehow always managed to keep dry and intact, despite the endless mud and rain of camp life. They'd been an unlikely pair. Caleb, the hardened sharpshooter with uncanny accuracy and a growing reputation for being able to make impossible shots, and Elias, the gentle giant, who'd been a schoolteacher before the war swallowed them whole. Yet, they'd formed a bond, forged in blood and gunpowder, that neither had expected to survive the conflict. The last time Caleb had seen Elias was in 1870, 5 years ago. Caleb had been in a particularly bad way, then drinking heavily, taking increasingly dangerous bounty hunting jobs, caring little whether he lived or died. Elias had found him in a filthy saloon in Santa Fe, dragged him outside, and sobered him up with harsh, preacher-like words and buckets of cold water. "You think Martha would want this, Caleb?" Thorne had demanded, his normally calm voice raised in anger. "You think this is keeping your promise to her?" Caleb had swung at him then, a wild, drunken, desperate punch that Thorne had easily sidestepped. When Caleb had fallen face first into the dirt, Thorne had helped him up, dusted him off, and taken him to a hotel room. The next morning, Elias had pressed a small, heavy leather pouch into Caleb's hand. Inside was enough gold to start fresh, to buy a small ranch and build the life Martha had dreamed of. "I can't take this," Caleb had protested, shame burning hotter than the fever in his shoulder. "You can, and you will," Elias had insisted, his blue eyes fixed on Caleb's own weary ones. "But promise me you'll use it to build something, not to destroy yourself." Caleb had promised, though he hadn't kept his word. He'd sent the gold back to Elias months later, unable to bring himself to use it for any purpose other than self-destruction. By then, he'd taken up the life of a solo, silent bounty hunter, using his uncanny skills with a rifle to track wanted men. It wasn't building anything, but at least it put his lethal talents to use against men who arguably deserved their fate, or so he told himself in the empty hours of the night. The sudden sound of rushing water pulled Caleb violently from his memories. A small, clear creek cut across the path ahead, its waters bubbling over smooth, polished stones. Beyond it, the trail wound upward into a small, secluded valley, nestled between 2 towering mesas. And there, standing sentinel, just as Elias's letter had described, were 3 ancient, gnarled cedars, marking a rough-hewn gate. Caleb reined dust to a stop, studying the property beyond. The ranch house was modest but solid, built from local red stone and timber, with a wide, welcoming porch wrapping around 2 sides. A barn, its rough-cut planks faded to a dull, rusty red, stood nearby. Several smaller outbuildings dotted the property, and beyond them, a pasture stretched toward the steep base of the nearest mesa. It was a good piece of land, defensible, with clear sight lines in most directions. A natural spring fed the creek, ensuring water even in the dry season. The kind of place where a man might finally keep a promise to build rather than destroy. As Caleb urged his horse forward through the gate, he noticed something that made his stomach tighten and the blood run cold in his veins. On a small rise behind the house, 2 rough-hewn crosses stood in the unmistakable outline of graves. The earth around them was still fresh, the wood of the markers unweathered. Elias's letter had said he was already gone. Caleb had assumed his friend had simply moved on, not that he had died. But there were two graves, not one. Elias and his wife. A massive, overwhelming wave of grief washed over Caleb, unexpected in its intensity. He hadn't seen his friend in 5 years, yet the confirmation of his death felt like losing a brother, the last, honest connection to the man he once was. Lost in his thoughts and the sudden surge of pain, Caleb almost missed the slight movement at the corner of the barn, a shadow detaching itself from deeper shadows. His instincts, honed by years of tracking and being tracked, snapped him back to full, razor-sharp alertness. He wasn't alone. Caleb's hand dropped instinctively to his revolver, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. Whoever was watching him could have shot him already if that was their intention. "I mean no harm," he called out, his voice rough from disuse and trail dust. "I'm Caleb Rhodes. Elias Thorne sent for me." Silence. The shadow near the barn didn't move. Caleb slowly dismounted, wincing as the motion pulled excruciatingly at his wounded shoulder. He kept his hands visible, away from his weapons. "Elias was my friend," he continued, projecting his voice to reach the listener. "I just learned of his passing. I'm sorry. I'm too late." The sudden, sharp impact of something striking the ancient cedar post beside his head, the sound of wood splintering, cut off his words. Caleb froze, his eyes focusing on the arrow, now quivering violently in the wood, its obsidian tip embedded a mere inch from where his face had been moments ago. It wasn't a warning shot. It was a perfect, deliberate miss, intended only to demonstrate skill and lethality, without causing immediate harm. Yet Caleb remained absolutely still, eyes scanning the property, noting the precise angle of the shot. The arrow had come from his right, somewhere near the house, not from the barn where he'd spotted the initial movement, which meant there were at least 2 people watching him. "Next one goes through your eye," a woman's voice called out. It was clear, steady, and carried the unnerving, dry confidence of the desert itself. "State your business, stranger." Before Caleb could respond to the threat, 3 figures emerged from various hiding spots. One from behind the house, one from the barn, and one from what appeared to be a root cellar whose heavy wooden doors lay open near a small garden. They were women, young women, Native American, Navajo, divided by Dene, judging by their features, their dark, intricate clothing, and the distinctive turquoise and silver jewelry woven into their attire. The eldest couldn't have been more than 24. The youngest, perhaps 15. The eldest, her face a mask of fierce determination, stepped forward, a powerful bow still drawn and aimed squarely at Caleb's chest. Her dark, almond-shaped eyes assessed every detail of his appearance, the weary posture, the graying hair, the bloody stain on his shoulder, the cold readiness in his gaze. "I ask your business," she repeated, her voice cutting through the silence. Caleb kept his hands raised and visible. "As I said, I'm Caleb Rhodes. Elias Thorne was my friend from the war. He sent me a letter asking me to come." The young woman's eyes narrowed, her focus shifting to the fresh blood soaking his shirt. "Elias has been dead 3 weeks. I just learned of it today," Caleb replied evenly, ignoring the throbbing pain. "I'm sorry for your loss. He was a good man." The tension in the air was palpable, thick with fear, suspicion, and the shared awareness of the 3 fresh graves on the hill. The youngest of the 3 women clutched a knife, her knuckles white around the bone handle. The middle one held a small leather pouch, perhaps containing something to throw, or perhaps a potent, blinding powder. The eldest, still training her arrow on Caleb, studied him with such raw intensity that he felt as though she were looking straight through his ragged duster and his wounds, straight to the empty soul beneath. "You're hurt," she finally stated, nodding toward the bloodstain on his shoulder. "Got shot. It's nothing serious." The eldest snorted, a brief, harsh sound of contempt. Men always say that. She glanced toward the middle sister. "Anya, check his wound. Kimmy, watch the trail." The middle sister, Anya, approached Caleb cautiously, her steps measured. "I need to see the wound," she said, her voice softer than her sister's, but no less firm. The eldest, the leader, finally lowered her bow, though she didn't fully relax the string. "He kept a picture," the eldest explained, her eyes still wary, her gaze not leaving Caleb's face. You and him. In uniform. She paused, her lips tightening. He said, "If a tall man with gray at his temples and eyes like winter came, we should trust him. He didn't say you'd bring trouble with you." "What trouble?" Caleb frowned, his mind instantly shifting back to the 2 dead men he'd left behind. "You're bleeding. That means someone shot you. That means someone might be following you." The sheer, cold logic of her statement was undeniable. "My name is Najoni," the eldest stated, finally introducing herself. "My English name is Narrow." "Narrow," Caleb repeated, a ghost of a sound. "A name that fits this empty land." "It means beautiful," she corrected him, her voice low and fierce. "Beautiful, even when broken. But it means nothing to you, white man." "Tell me, Caleb Rhodes, what exactly did Elias mean by a final vow?" Caleb nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on Nizoni, or Narrow, as she preferred to call herself. He watched as the middle sister, Anya, with the practiced efficiency of a field medic, carefully cut away the blood-soaked cotton of his shirt. Her hands were small, yet surprisingly strong and steady, as she cleaned the entry and exit points of the bullet with a mixture that smelled strongly of alcohol and unfamiliar desert herbs. It stung fiercely, a searing pain that cut through the fever's dullness, but Caleb didn't flinch. He hadn't flinched at much in the last 7 years. "You have practice with this," he observed quietly, admiring the steady skill in Anya's hands. Elias's wife, Martha, was a nurse during the war. Narrow explained from where she stood near the doorway, her vigilance unwavering. "She taught us. She combined her people's medicine with ours. She died first. The fever took her 2 days before Elias followed." Anya shook her head sadly as she worked. "We did everything we could. My medicines, Martha's medicines. Nothing helped." "I'm sorry," Caleb said, and he truly meant it. The youngest, Kimmy, slipped back into the house, moving with the silent, lithe grace of a desert cat. "No one on the trail," she reported to Narrow. Her gaze fell on Caleb, a mixture of fear and curiosity evident in her expression. "Are you really the man from the photograph? The one Elias called the best shot in Tennessee?" A ghost of a grim smile touched Caleb's lips. He exaggerated. "I missed plenty, but not when it mattered," Narrow interjected, her voice low. "That's what he said. Caleb never misses when it matters. Why did Elias send for you, and why now?" Caleb reached slowly into his pocket, telegraphing every movement, and handed her Elias's letter. Narrow took it, her dark eyes scanning the frantic, familiar script. Something in her expression shifted, a flicker of recognition, a softening perhaps. "The final vow," she murmured, almost to herself. "What does it mean?" Caleb asked. Narrow folded the letter and handed it back to him. "It means you should come inside, Caleb Rhodes. We have much to discuss." She turned toward the house, then paused, her gaze meeting his with cold resolve. "And if you make any move to harm my sisters or this land, I'll put an arrow through your black heart before you can blink." Caleb believed her. He knew the difference between a threat and a promise, and this was the latter, delivered with cold, surgical certainty. The interior of the ranch house was cooler than the Arizona heat outside, its thick stone walls providing natural insulation. It was sparsely but comfortably furnished with handcrafted wooden tables and chairs, a stone hearth, and simple, colorful Navajo woven rugs covering portions of the plank floor. Narrow gestured for Caleb to sit at the kitchen table while Anya finished treating his wound. She applied a thick poultice, the herbs cool against his inflamed skin, before wrapping the shoulder tightly with fresh bandage cloth. "Harrison Blackburn and his wife saved our lives," Narrow began, her voice measured and precise. 10 years ago, a troop of renegade soldiers attacked our camp near the Tsile Peaks. I was 14, Anya 12, Kimmy just 5. Our parents were killed. We were captured and taken to be sold. Caleb's jaw tightened. The revelation about the bounty hunters and the attempted assassination suddenly fading in the face of this deeper, more fundamental violence. He knew of such practices the dark, shameful underbelly of the frontier, the selling of captives, especially young girls, a chapter of history men like him tried to forget. "Elias and Martha bought us at the market in Santa Fe," Narrow continued, her eyes hardening at memories Caleb could only imagine, but not for the reasons other men bought native girls. They brought us here, gave us a home, taught us to read and write English. They treated us like daughters. They were good people. Martha showed me how to combine my people's medicine with the white man's knowledge, Anya added softly, wiping her hands clean. Elias taught us about the law, about property, about how to survive in this shifting world. But not everyone sees us as people, Narrow said, her voice taking on a hard, dangerous edge. To many, we are still just property, and when Elias became ill, he knew what might happen to us when he was gone. Kimi, who had been quietly watching Caleb, spoke up. He said you would come. He said you would protect us like he did. Caleb felt the monumental weight of that expectation settle onto his shoulders, heavier than any burden he had carried since Martha's death. Why me? He asked, the question directed at the cruel hand of fate more than at Narrow. Because he trusted you, Narrow said simply, meeting his gaze with unblinking certainty. And because he believed you needed us as much as we need you. The statement hung in the air, challenging Caleb's understanding of his purpose here. Before he could respond, Anya placed a steaming mug in front of him. Drink this. It will help with the fever and the pain. You need rest. Caleb accepted the mug, breathing in the earthy, bitter smell. I'm not sure I'm what Elias thought I was, he said after a cautious sip. I'm not the same man he knew during the war. None of us are who we were before, Narrow replied. But Elias believed in you until the end. He said you were a man who kept his promises, even when they were hard to keep. Martha's face flashed in Caleb's mind, her smile, her eyes, the way she'd looked at him on their wedding day. And then, unbidden, the agonizing image of her final moments, the light fading from those same eyes as she made him promise to find his way back to being a man who could build rather than destroy. A promise he'd failed to keep for 7 long, desolate years. I'll stay until my shoulder heals, Caleb finally said, the promise feeling small but real. Beyond that, I can't make any guarantees. Narrow studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, a subtle confirmation of something only she knew. Fair enough. You can have Elias's room. It's the one at the end of the hall. As Anya led him to the bedroom, Caleb felt the immense tension of the last few days catching up with him. The herb mixture was making him drowsy, dulling the pain in his shoulder and the edges of his desperate thoughts. The room was simple, a bed with a handmade Navajo quilt, a dresser, a chair by the window. On the wall hung the photograph. Narrow had mentioned Caleb and Elias in their uniforms, standing side by side, their expressions serious, but their eyes alive with the peculiar brotherhood that forms between men who face death together. Caleb sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion washing over him in waves. As he lay back, his last conscious thought was of Elias's letter and the mysterious final vow that had drawn him here. Whatever it was, he had a chilling premonition that it would change everything. The fever dreams came as Caleb slept. Martha reaching for him across a widening chasm of darkness. Elias standing on the other side, beckoning. 3 shadowy figures with bows and arrows guarding a treasure Caleb couldn't identify. And through it all, a voice, sometimes Martha's, sometimes Elias's, repeating the same words, "Keep your promise." He awoke to moonlight streaming through the window, his shirt soaked with sweat, but his mind clearer than before. The fever had broken. Whatever Anya had given him had done its swift, ancient work. Caleb sat up slowly, testing his shoulder. The pain was still there, but duller, more manageable. He could move his arm without feeling like a hot poker was being driven into his flesh. The house was quiet. By the position of the moon, he guessed it was well past midnight. Everyone would be asleep. Carefully, he rose and moved to the window. The ranch lay bathed in silver moonlight, peaceful and still. From this vantage point, he could see the 2 fresh graves on the hillside, the crosses casting long, lonely shadows across the freshly turned earth. A movement on the porch caught his eye. Someone was sitting in one of the rocking chairs, a silhouette against the backdrop of the moonlit landscape. Caleb pulled on his boots and made his way quietly through the house, moving with the practiced stealth of a man accustomed to going unnoticed when necessary. Nero turned her head slightly when he stepped onto the porch, acknowledging his presence without speaking. She held a glass of amber liquid whiskey. By the smell of it, Elias's private stock. "Thought you'd be out longer," she said after a moment, her voice low and soft, a sound not unlike the gentle wind that sometimes sighed through the red rock formations. "Anya's medicine usually puts men twice your size to sleep for a full day. I've built up a tolerance to many things," Caleb replied, leaning against the porch railing. His shoulder protested, but he ignored it. Nero studied him, then reached beside her chair and produced another glass and the bottle. She poured a generous measure and held it out to him. "Elias's private stock," she explained. "He saved it for special occasions." Caleb accepted the glass, the irony not lost on him. The last time he'd seen Elias, his friend had been lecturing him about drinking too much. Now, here he was, sharing Elias's whiskey with a young Navajo woman under an Arizona moon. Life, he thought bitterly, took the strangest, cruelest turn. They drank in silence for a while. The only sounds the gentle creaking of Nero's rocking chair and the distant call of nightbirds. "He talked about you," Nero finally said, her voice softer than Caleb had heard it before. "Said you were the best man he ever knew, and the most dangerous." Caleb's mouth twitched. That sounds like Elias always seeing both sides of a person. Was he right? "Are you dangerous?" "To some," Caleb acknowledged, taking another sip of the warm, smoky whiskey. "Not to you or your sisters, if that's what you're asking." Nero nodded as if confirming something to herself. "The men who shot you, they won't be the last to come, will they?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Caleb considered lying, offering false reassurance. But something told him Nero wasn't the type of woman who appreciated being shielded from hard truths. "Probably not," he admitted. "Someone doesn't want me here. Someone who knows about Elias's letter and what it might mean." "Land Baron Silas Creed." Nero said the name like venom on her lips. "Who?" "The corporate judge and landowner for this territory. He wants this land." Nero's hand tightened around her glass. "He's been trying to claim it since before Elias fell ill. Says 3 native girls can't legally own property, no matter what Elias's will says." The pieces began to fall into place in Caleb's mind. "And you think he sent those men to stop me from reaching the ranch?" "I know he did," Nero replied with cold certainty. "His son, Jed, was here 2 days after Elias died. Said the ranch would be auctioned for taxes unless we had a white man to stand for us in court." Her dark eyes met Caleb's. "Elias said you would come. He said you would be that man." Caleb looked out over the moonlit property, understanding growing within him. This was the final vow Elias had written about. Not just a piece of land, but a purpose. A chance to protect something instead of destroying it. A way to keep his promise to Martha at last. "Why does Creed want this land so badly?" Caleb asked. "It's a good piece of property, but there's better to be had with less trouble." Nero rose from her chair and moved to stand beside him at the railing. "Look there," she said, pointing toward the distant mountains. "The railroad wants to build a line through the main pass. This ranch sits at the only viable route for miles. Whoever controls this land controls access to the pass, and Creed stands to profit greatly." Nero's voice was filled with bitter contempt. "He's been buying up all the land along the proposed route. Most people sell willingly, but Elias refused. Because of you 3, Caleb finished. She nodded. "This is our home now, the only one we have left." Caleb drained the last of his whiskey, the pieces fitting together in his mind. Elias had known that without protection, the 3 women would lose everything once he was gone. He'd reached out to Caleb not just as a friend, but as someone with the skills and the fearsome reputation to stand against men like Silas Creed. "I'm not sure I'm the right man for this," Caleb said honestly. "I've spent the last 7 years trying to get myself killed, not protecting others." Nero turned to look at him directly, her expression unreadable in the moonlight. "Elias said you made a promise to your wife before she died, a promise you hadn't been able to keep." The statement hit Caleb like a physical blow. He hadn't told Elias the exact words he'd exchanged with Martha in her final moments. Thorne must have guessed, or perhaps just known Caleb well enough to understand the depth of his brokenness. He said this might be your last chance to keep it, Narrow continued. That's why he called it a final vow. Not just his promise to us, but yours to her. The night air suddenly felt too heavy to breathe. Caleb set his empty glass on the railing with a hand that wasn't quite steady. I need to think. Narrow reached out, surprising him by placing her hand briefly on his uninjured arm. Think all you need. But know this. We won't leave this land willingly. If you choose not to help us, we'll fight anyway. We'll just die doing it. She gathered the bottle and glasses and moved toward the door. Before entering, she paused. Elias believed in you, Caleb Rhodes. He said, when it mattered most, he never missed his shot. He thought this mattered. She disappeared into the house, leaving Caleb alone with the vast, indifferent moon, the distant mountains, and the unbearable, crushing weight of promises both kept and broken. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from so I don't feel so alone out here. Dawn broke over the eastern mesas, painting the red rock landscape in hues of gold and crimson. Caleb had remained on the porch for hours after Narrow left, wrestling with the ghosts he'd long tried to outrun. Now, as the first rays of sunlight touched the crosses on the hill behind the house, he made his way toward them. The climb was gentle, but enough to make his wounded shoulder throb in protest. The graves were simple, the earth still fresh. Small stones had been placed along the perimeters in a familiar pattern, a blending of traditions, just as the lives within the ranch house represented a merging of worlds. You always did know how to back a man into a corner, Elias, Caleb said softly to the grave on the right. Couldn't just ask outright. Had to make it about keeping promises. A dry breeze stirred the grass around the graves, rustling like a whispered response. I'm not who I was, Elias, Caleb continued. The words a rough confession. Not the man you knew during the war. I've done things, friend. Things that can't be undone. He knelt beside the graves, feeling the morning sun warm on his back. But you knew that, didn't you? You knew, and you still sent for me. Caleb shook his head, a rueful smile touching his lips. Always did see something in me I couldn't see myself. From this vantage point, he could see the entire ranch spread below the house, the barn, the garden where young plants were beginning to grow, the creek winding its way through the property. It was beautiful in the morning light, peaceful in a way few places Caleb had known could claim to be. The kind of place Martha would have loved. The sound of movement behind him alerted Caleb to someone's approach. He didn't turn, recognizing the light, careful footsteps. You're up early, he said. Kimmy, the youngest of the sisters, came to stand beside him. Unlike Narrow's constant weariness or Anya's quiet assessment, Kimmy's expression was open, curious. I come every morning, she said, her voice lighter than her sister's. I tell them about the rabbits in the garden and the hawk that built a nest in the big cedar. She knelt and placed a small bundle of wildflowers between the graves. Elias liked when I told him about the animals. Caleb watched as she arranged the flowers with care. You were close to them. Kimmy nodded, a sadness passing over her young face. I don't remember much about my real parents. I was too small when they died. Elias and Martha are the only father and mother I really knew. The simple statement carried a weight of loss that Caleb understood all too well. Narrow says you might leave soon, Kimmy continued, looking up at him with eyes too old for her young face. She says we shouldn't expect you to stay. Caleb met her gaze. Your sister is practical. But Elias said you would stay. He said you were a man who kept his word. Kimmy rose, dusting soil from her skirt. Were you there in the war with him? I was. Caleb stood as well, wincing slightly at the stiffness in his shoulder. Did you kill people? The directness of the question caught Caleb off guard, though it shouldn't have. Children often cut straight to the heart of matters adults prefer to circle. Yes, he answered honestly. Many. Kimmy nodded, accepting the truth without judgment. Elias said he did too, but that it haunted him. Does it haunt you? Caleb looked out over the ranch, considering his answer. Some deaths more than others. The ones who didn't deserve it, Kimmy suggested. Those, Caleb agreed. And the ones I should have prevented, but couldn't. Kimmy was quiet for a moment, processing this. There's breakfast, she finally said. Anya sent me to tell you. She wants to check your wound, too. As they walked back down the hill together, Kimmy spoke again. If you stay, I could show you the secret places on the ranch. The cave where mountain lions sometimes sleep. The pool where the biggest fish hide. Elias liked when I showed him those things. There was hope in her voice, carefully contained, but present nonetheless. Caleb felt something shift within him, a crack in the granite wall he'd built around his heart since Martha's death. I'd like that, Kimmy, he said. If I stay, her smile was quick but genuine, lighting her face in a way that reminded Caleb painfully of the children he and Martha had once hoped to have. Back at the house, the smell of coffee and fresh bread filled the kitchen. Anya was at the stove, stirring something in a cast-iron pot. Narrow sat at the table, studying what appeared to be a ledger. Your shoulder needs checking, Anya said without turning around. Sit, Caleb complied, easing himself into a chair. Anya set aside her cooking and came to him, unwrapping the bandage with efficient movements. The infection is receding, she observed, probing gently around the wound. But you tore the flesh again. You need to rest the arm. I'll keep that in mind. Narrow closed the ledger and regarded him with her usual measured assessment. Have you decided? Direct as always. I need to know more, Caleb said. About Silas Creed and the situation here. About what Elias expected me to do. Narrow opened her mouth to respond, but a sound from outside interrupted her, hoofbeats approaching at a steady pace. All four of them froze instantly, their instincts, both native and frontier-born, snapping to attention. Narrow moved to the window, staying to one side to remain unseen. 2 riders, she reported, her voice tense. Coming up the main trail, Caleb stood, his hand automatically reaching for the revolver that wasn't there. His weapons were still with his saddlebags. Where are my gun? By the door, Kimmy said, already moving to retrieve them. Narrow's expression was grim. If it's Creed's men, they won't be alone for long. Caleb checked his revolver and rifle quickly, ensuring both were loaded and ready. You 3 stay inside, he instructed. I'll handle this. Narrow's eyes flashed. This is our home. We defend it together. Fine, Caleb conceded, recognizing the immovable determination in her stance. But let me do the talking first. No arrows unless I signal. Anya handed him a small leather pouch. Throw this at their feet if they attack. Don't breathe it in yourself. Caleb tucked the pouch into his pocket without question, then moved to the door. He stepped onto the porch just as the riders came into clear view. The lead rider was a man in his late 60s, well-dressed in a manner that spoke of wealth and arrogant position. His companion was younger, perhaps in his late 20s, with a hard face and cold eyes that immediately marked him as dangerous. Both men reined their horses to a stop at the sight of Caleb, standing on the porch, rifle held casually but ready at his side. This is private property, Caleb called out. The older man studied Caleb for a moment, then smiled, a practiced expression that never reached his eyes. I believe you're mistaken, sir, he replied, his voice carrying the educated tones of a distant civilization. This property is currently in legal dispute. I am Silas Creed, the land commissioner for this territory. He gestured to his companion. My son, Jed. The younger man, Jed, was staring at Caleb with an intensity that went beyond normal curiosity. There was recognition there, and something else, satisfaction. I know who you are, Jed said, his mouth curving into a predatory smile. Caleb Rhodes, the sharpshooter from Tennessee. He laughed, the sound without humor. Well, I'll be damned. The bounty hunters actually did their job. They just didn't live to collect their pay. Caleb kept his expression neutral, but internally, pieces were falling into place. Jed Creed had sent the men who tried to kill him, using Elias's letter as bait. Silas Creed cleared his throat. You'll have to excuse my son's manners, Mr. Rhodes. May I ask what business you have at the Thorn Ranch? Behind Caleb, the door opened. Narrow stepped out, her bow conspicuously absent, but her stance no less ready for conflict. "Mr. Rhodes is here at the late Mr. Thorne's request," she said, her voice steady and formal. "As executor of the estate." This was news to Caleb, but he didn't let his surprise show. He simply nodded, playing along with Narrow's strategy. Silas Creed's facade of politeness slipped momentarily, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Is that so? How interesting. I wasn't aware Elias had appointed an executor." "It's all legal and proper," Narrow continued. "The documents were filed with the territorial office in Santa Fe last month." "Well, this changes matters somewhat," Creed said, recovering his composure. "You understand, Mr. Rhodes, that there are certain complications regarding this property." "I'm beginning to get the picture," Caleb replied. Jed Creed had not taken his eyes off Caleb. "You know, there's quite a price on your head in certain parts of this territory. For a man who killed a Pinkerton agent in Flagstaff 2 years back." Caleb's expression didn't change, but inwardly he cursed. That particular incident had been self-defense, but Caleb doubted that detail would matter much to a wealthy land baron looking for leverage. "Interesting time for you to show up here," Jed continued, his smile growing. "Almost like someone wanted you found." And there it was, the trap, laid out in the open. Jed had arranged for the bounty hunters to find Caleb using Elias's letter as bait. He'd expected them to either kill Caleb or drive him to the ranch where Jed could use the outstanding bounty as leverage. Silas Creed sighed, as if disappointed in his son's lack of subtlety. "What my son is trying to say, Mr. Rhodes, is that we might be able to help each other. You have legal problems. I happen to be a very influential man, and all I have to do is convince the Navajo girls to leave." Caleb finished for him. "They have no legal right to this property," Creed said, his voice hardening. "No matter what Elias Thorne might have told them, the law is clear on this matter." Narrow's hand brushed against Caleb's arm, a silent signal. From the corner of his eye, he could see Anya and Kimi watching from the window. "I'll need time to review the situation," Caleb said, intentionally vague. "As executor, I have responsibilities to consider." Creed studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Of course, take a few days. Consider your options carefully." His gaze shifted to Narrow. "All of you should consider your options." Jed looked as if he wanted to say more, but a sharp glance from his father silenced him. "We'll return in 3 days," the land baron said, gathering his reins. "I trust by then you'll have reached the sensible conclusion, Mr. Rhodes." As the two men turned their horses and rode away, Narrow spoke quietly beside Caleb. "You see now what we're facing." Caleb watched the riders disappear down the trail, his mind working through the implications of the encounter. "They set a trap for me," he said. "Used Elias's letter to draw me in. And now they'll use the bounty on your head to control you," Narrow agreed. Unless I help you fight them," Caleb finished. He turned to face her. "Did Elias really appoint me executor of his estate?" A ghost of a smile touched Narrow's lips. "No. But he did leave something for you. Something that might change everything." She held his gaze, a challenge in her dark eyes. "It's time you knew the whole truth, Caleb Rhodes. About Elias, about us." Her voice lowered, becoming a dangerous whisper. "And about your father." "My father," Caleb repeated, confusion evident in his voice. "My father has been dead for 20 years. What could he possibly have to do with this?" Narrow's expression was unreadable. "Everything," she said simply. "He has everything to do with why we're all here now." And with that cryptic statement, she turned and walked back into the house, leaving Caleb standing on the porch with more questions than answers, and the distinct feeling that he'd just stepped into something far more complicated than a land dispute in the Arizona borderlands. "Hey there. Friend, take a moment and get yourself a full glass of water. It's easy to forget, but staying hydrated is crucial for your health. Also, if you've been sitting for a while, do a quick lap around the room and give your eyes a break from the screen. Your body will thank you." Caleb followed Narrow into the ranch house, her words about his father echoing in his mind. The kitchen felt suddenly too small, the air too heavy with unspoken truths. Anya and Kimi exchanged glances, clearly aware of what was coming. "Sit," Narrow instructed, gesturing to the table. Caleb remained standing. "I want answers now." Narrow's eyes flashed with momentary defiance, then softened with understanding. She nodded once and moved to a small cabinet near the stone hearth. From it, she withdrew a wooden box, weathered with age but well-maintained. She placed it on the table and stepped back. "Elias left this for you," she said quietly. "He said when the time came, it would explain everything." Caleb approached the box cautiously, as though it might contain something dangerous. In a way, it did. The past had always been more threatening to him than any loaded gun. The box wasn't locked. Its hinges creaked as he lifted the lid, revealing a leather-bound journal and a folded piece of yellowed paper. Beneath these lay a tarnished silver pocket watch that Caleb recognized immediately. His father's watch, which he'd assumed lost decades ago. "How did Elias get this?" Caleb asked, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. "Read the journal," Narrow replied. "Start with the entry marked by the red ribbon." Caleb lifted the journal, feeling its weight in his hands, the weight of secrets and memories. A faded red cloth ribbon marked a page halfway through. He opened it there and began to read. April 18th, 1865. "The war is over, but some wounds will never heal. Today I met Samuel Rhodes again, the first time since we parted ways in Virginia. He's changed, hardened in ways that go beyond what battle does to a man. We spoke of his son, Caleb, who has distinguished himself as a sharpshooter in the conflict. Samuel spoke with pride, but also fear. Fear that the killing has changed his boy irrevocably. Samuel confessed something terrible to me tonight, something that weighs heavily on his soul. Before the war, he led a raid on a Navajo camp near the Arizona border. He believed they were harboring bandits who had stolen cattle from his employer's ranch. He was wrong. The camp was peaceful, with no connection to the raiders. 17 people died that day. Samuel carries each death like a stone around his neck. But it's worse than that. He took 3 young girls' captive sisters. He sold them to slave traders in Santa Fe. He was drunk when he did it, he says, out of his mind with guilt over the killings. When he sobered, he tried to find them again, to undo what he'd done, but they were gone. He made me promise something tonight. If I ever found those girls, I was to protect them. And if something happened to him, I was to tell his son the truth, no matter how painful. Caleb must know, he said. He must have the chance to right my wrong. Samuel is dying consumption. The doctors say he won't last the year. I've promised to honor his request, though I pray I never find those girls. Some wounds are better left unprobed. Caleb's hands trembled as he turned the page. His father, the man he'd idolized, the man whose moral compass had guided his early years, a murderer of innocence and a seller of children. The revelation hit him like a physical blow, worse than any bullet. He looked up at Narrow, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. "You," he said softly, "your camp. It was my father who." Narrow's face remained impassive, but her eyes held a depth of emotion that spoke of years of pain carefully contained. "Yes," she confirmed. "Samuel Rhodes led the raid that killed our parents. He is the man who sold us." Caleb closed the journal, needing a moment to process this terrible truth. His shoulder wound throbbed in time with his racing heartbeat, a physical counterpoint to the emotional pain lancing through him. "Why didn't Elias tell me?" he asked, the question directed as much at the absent Elias as at the women before him. All those years, he never said a word. "Keep reading," Narrow urged. "There's more." Caleb reopened the journal, turning to the next entry. December 3rd, 1870. "I found them. After 5 years of searching, I finally found the 3 Navajo sisters. They were being sold again, passed from owner to owner like cattle. The oldest, she calls herself Nizoni, looked at me with such hatred when I approached the auction block. She thought I was just another white man come to use them. I paid more than I could afford, nearly every dollar I had saved. Martha didn't question it when I brought them home. I haven't told Nizoni and her sisters the truth about how I came to look for them. I haven't mentioned Samuel Rhodes. The wounds are too fresh, the hatred too justified. Perhaps someday, when trust has been built, I will tell them everything. For now, it is enough that they are safe. I wrote to Caleb today, asking him to visit. I couldn't bring myself to put the truth in a letter." Caleb turned pages, scanning through the years of entries. He saw his own name appear occasionally, Elias noting failed attempts to reach him, reports of Caleb's exploits as a bounty hunter, concerns about his self-destructive path. The final entry was dated just 3 weeks ago, the handwriting noticeably shakier than the earlier pages. March 30th, 1875. I am dying. Martha's already gone. My greatest regret is that I never told Caleb the truth. The girls know now I told Narrow everything last week. I expected hatred, but instead found forgiveness. Not for Samuel, but for my part in keeping the secret. I've written to Caleb one last time. I pray he comes. These girls need protection, and he needs redemption. The ranch is legally theirs now, but the law is a fickle thing where natives are concerned, especially young women. Silas Creed has made his intentions clear. Caleb is their best hope, a man with his reputation, his skills. He could keep them safe. And they, with their quiet strength and capacity for forgiveness, might just save him from himself. It's a final vow I make to all of them to bring them together, to give them all a chance at healing. Caleb closed the journal slowly, its weight in his hands now carrying the crushing burden of 2 generations of sin and redemption. The room was silent. Now you know, Narrow said quietly. Elias wanted you to know everything. Caleb looked at each of the sisters in turn. Narrow, standing straight and proud despite the weight of her past. Anya, her gentle eyes holding wisdom beyond her years. And Kimmy, who barely remembered the camp where she was born, but carried its loss in her blood nonetheless. Victims of his father's cruelty, a legacy of violence he never knew he'd inherited. I'm sorry, he said, the words woefully inadequate for the magnitude of the wrong done to them. What your father did was not your doing, Anya interjected softly. Elias made sure we understood that. But it is my responsibility now, Caleb replied, the realization settling over him with the weight of absolute truth. That's what Elias intended. That's why he brought us together. Narrow nodded. He believed you needed this as much as we need you. A chance to make right what was done wrong. Silas Creed, Caleb said, bringing the conversation back to the immediate threat. He won't stop with threats. Men like him never do. No, Narrow agreed. He won't. His son, Jed, is even worse cruel for the pleasure of it. Kimi, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. They killed Elias. Caleb's head snapped up. What? Kimi. Anya cautioned. He should know, Kimi insisted. The fever wasn't natural. Jed Creed came here 2 days before Elias fell ill. He brought food, said it was a peace offering. Her young face hardened with conviction. Elias was fine until he ate it. It doesn't matter if we can prove it, Narrow cut in. What matters is that they want this land, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it. Caleb nodded, his tactical mind already shifting to the problem at hand. How long before they come back with more men? 3 days, Narrow replied. But I wouldn't trust a Creed to keep his word. They could come tonight. Then we prepare, Caleb said. The decision made, final and absolute. Whatever his personal feelings about the revelations of the past hour, the immediate danger was clear. Show me everything about the property. Every approach, every defensive position, every escape route. Narrow studied him for a moment, as if gauging his commitment. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her, because she nodded once, briskly. Kimi knows every inch of this land, she said. She'll show you. As the day progressed, Caleb's respect for the 3 sisters grew. They weren't helpless victims waiting to be saved. They were survivors who had built a life despite everything the world had thrown at them. Kimi led him around the property with the sure-footed confidence of someone who knew every rock and cedar. She showed him the hidden spring that fed the creek even in drought, the cave system that ran beneath the eastern ridge, the high points that offered the best views of approaching riders. Elias taught us to shoot, she explained as they paused on a bluff overlooking the main trail. Narrow is the best with a bow, but I'm better with a rifle. Are you now? Caleb challenged, a hint of a smile touching his lips. I hit what I aim at. That's a start, Caleb acknowledged. But hitting what you aim at in practice is different from hitting what you aim at when someone is shooting back. Kimi's smile faded. I know. I'm not a child. Caleb studied her 15 years old, but with eyes that had seen more darkness than many grown men. No, she wasn't a child. Not really. Childhood had been stolen from her the day Samuel Rhodes rode into her camp, his father. The thought still burned like acid. "I'd like to see you shoot sometime," he said, changing the subject. "Maybe you can teach me a thing or two." That earned him another smile, brief but genuine. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western hills when they returned to the house. Anya was in the garden harvesting herbs. She looked up as they approached, her expression serene despite the circumstances. "How is your shoulder?" "Manageable," Caleb replied. Anya's eyes, observant as always, saw through the understatement. "It needs tending again. The walking and the stress won't have helped it heal." Caleb didn't argue. He followed her inside where she directed him to sit at the kitchen table. With the same gentle efficiency, she removed the bandage and examined the wound. "The infection is still present, but not spreading," she observed. "But you tore the flesh again." As she worked, grinding herbs with a stone mortar and pestle, she spoke without looking up. "Elias told me once that in the old ways of my people, wounds of the body were seen as reflections of wounds of the spirit. To heal one, you must address the other. Is that what you believe?" "I believe there is wisdom in it," she replied. "Your body fights the infection in your shoulder, but your spirit fights something else. The truth about your father, perhaps." Caleb's jaw tightened. "My father died a long time ago." "Did he?" Anya looked up, her dark eyes searching his face. "Or has he been living in you all this time, in the image you held of him?" The question struck too close to home. Caleb had spent years trying to live up to the memory of Samuel Rhodes, a stern but fair man, a man of principle, or so he'd believed. "My father was a murderer," Caleb said, the words bitter on his tongue. "He slaughtered innocents and sold children. What part of that should I honor?" Anya didn't flinch at the harshness in his tone. "Perhaps none of it. But you are not him, Caleb Rhodes. The choice of what kind of man to be has always been yours." She applied the fresh poultice to his wound. "Blood is just blood," she interrupted, her voice suddenly firm. "It's choices that define a person, not ancestry." "How do you do it?" Caleb asked suddenly. "How do you not hate me for what he did?" "Hate is a fire that consumes the one who carries it," she said softly. "We choose which sins to honor. Elias believed you were a good man who had lost his way. That's why he sent for you, not because of your father's sin, but because of your own potential for redemption." With that, she left him to his thoughts, which swirled like autumn leaves in a windstorm, chaotic, uncontrollable, impossible to grasp. If you're watching on TV, don't hesitate, grab your phone, and hit subscribe to my channel so you'll never miss out on our amazing characters. The dawn came gray and cool, a thin layer of clouds obscuring the sun's rise. Caleb woke before first light, his body remembering the rhythms of impending conflict. His shoulder ached dully, but the infection was clearly receding thanks to Anya's treatments. He would be able to shoot if necessary, and he had little doubt it would be necessary before the day was done. He found the others already awake and making final preparations. Nero was positioning ammunition at the various defensive points. Anya was dividing her medicinal and tactical mixtures. Kimmy was checking and rechecking the traps she had set. There was a quiet, almost beautiful efficiency to their movements. Caleb took his coffee to the highest point of the property, a small rise behind the barn. The morning mist clung to the lower areas, shrouding the creek and parts of the trail in a ghostly white blanket. He was halfway through his coffee when Kimmy appeared, moving with unusual urgency. "Riders," she reported breathlessly. "Coming from the east, many of them." Caleb followed her to a better vantage point. Sure enough, a line of horsemen was visible on the distant trail, still small with distance, but unmistakable in purpose. He counted quickly, at least 15, possibly more. They were moving at a deliberate pace, confident in their numbers and purpose. "It's time," he said. "Get Nero. Tell her to take her position. You know what to do." Caleb made his way to the house. The familiar weight of the Winchester in his hands brought a cold clarity to his mind. Nero met him on the porch, her own rifle held ready. "They're coming earlier than expected. They want to catch us unprepared," Caleb replied. "Remember, let them make the first aggressive move. Make it clear to anyone watching that they are the attackers, not us. The group halted at the edge of the property, just beyond the gate marked by the 3 ancient cedars. Silas Creed and Jed rode forward alone. "Mr. Rhodes," Creed called, his voice carrying easily, "I see you've chosen to remain with these individuals despite our conversation." "This is private property, Mr. Creed," Caleb called back. "Legally deeded to the Thorne sisters. You and your men need to leave." "The deed says otherwise," Caleb replied evenly. "All legally registered with the territorial office in Santa Fe. All legal and proper." Creed's face darkened. "I am the law in this territory, Mr. Rhodes. You do well to remember that. I'll make you one final offer. Leave now. Take the girls if you must, and we'll forget about the bounty on your head. Stay, and I'll ensure you face the consequences." "Interesting proposal from a man of the law," Caleb scoffed, "offering to overlook a crime in exchange for illegal seizure of property." "Enough talk," Jed cut in impatiently, turning to signal the men waiting beyond the gate. "Take them." "Last chance, Rhodes," Creed warned. Caleb's response was measured, deliberate. "This is legally owned property. We are defending it against unlawful seizure. Any violence will be initiated by you and your men, not us." Creed's face hardened. Without another word, he turned his horse and rode back to the waiting group. "Get ready," Caleb murmured to Narrow. "They're coming." The attackers spread out, advancing on the ranch from multiple directions. They moved with the calculated precision of experienced fighters, but were met instantly by the chaos of the traps. 2 riders on the eastern approach pulled up short as their horses balked, tangled in Kimmy's carefully placed rope and wire. Moments later, a shout of alarm rose from the creek as the southern group rode straight into the muddy pit Anya had prepared. Creed, positioned at the gate, raised a hand in frustration. "Move forward. They're just women and 1 man." 6 riders approached directly toward the house. "Let them make the first move," Caleb reminded Narrow. The first shot cracked through the morning air, splintering wood on the porch railing near Caleb's position. The battle had begun. Caleb's response was immediate and devastating. His first shot caught a scarred man high in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. Narrow, firing with similar, surgical precision, struck another rider in the leg. Neither shot was meant to kill, but both instantly removed threats. "Anya, now," Narrow called. From inside the house, Anya hurled one of her prepared pouches. It landed in the midst of the riders, bursting open on impact. A thick, acrid, blinding smoke billowed upward, enveloping the men and their mounts in seconds. In the confusion, Caleb and Narrow continued their precise fire, targeting limbs and weapons. The attackers retreated beyond the smoke cloud, seeking cover. Jed Creed, having circled wide, was approaching the house from the rear with 2 men. "Narrow," Caleb called urgently. 3 coming from behind. Jed's with them. Anya is alone back there. "I'll go," Caleb decided, already moving. He reached the back just as the first shots shattered the kitchen window. Anya was crouched behind an overturned table, a small pistol in her hands. "Stay down," Caleb instructed. He waited for a pause in their fire, then leaned out the window and squeezed off 2 rapid shots, hitting one of Jed's men in the arm. Jed's response was vicious. A barrage of gunfire forced Caleb back from the window. "You're outgunned, Rhodes," Jed shouted. "Throw out your weapons and the Navajo property, and maybe we'll let you live." A new sound joined the gunfire. Hoofbeats approaching fast from the direction of the main trail. "Reinforcements. Riders coming, not Creed's men." Narrow's voice echoed from the front of the house. Caleb risked another glance out the window. Jed had heard the horses too, and looked toward the sound, momentary confusion on his face. "If you've made it this far, I know you're a true fan of WWL. From the bottom of my heart, I wish your day is filled with health and happiness, and may a little stroke of luck find you in the next 15 minutes. Don't forget to share it with me in the comments." "Anya, the smoke," Caleb shouted. She tossed her last pouch through the broken window, temporarily neutralizing Jed and his companion. Caleb moved quickly to the front of the house, joining Narrow. At the gate, 6 riders were approaching. At their head rode a man in a faded Union cavalry coat, a badge gleaming on his chest. "Sergeant Winters," Narrow breathed, recognition and relief in her voice. "Elias's friend." Sergeant Caleb Winters reined in his horse before Silas Creed. "Mr. Creed," he said, his voice carrying clearly. "I'm here to serve papers from the territorial governor's office." "What papers? What is the meaning of this interruption?" Creed sputtered. "By order of the governor," Winters announced, "all proceedings regarding the Thorn Ranch are to cease immediately, pending a full investigation into allegations of judicial misconduct." Jed, having escaped the smoke, hurried to his father. "This is our land. The railroad needs it. No Navajo property is going to stop progress. We should have just burned them out weeks ago," Jed screamed, his frustration and hatred boiling over. Poisoning the old man wasn't enough. A deadly silence fell. Jed's words hung in the air, a sudden, damning confession. "Poisoning?" Winters asked quietly, dangerously. "Did you just confess to murdering Elias Thorne, son?" "I didn't. That's not what I meant," Jed stammered, looking to his father, but Creed had already physically distanced himself. "Sergeant Winters," Caleb called from the porch. "We have witnesses who can testify that Jed Creed brought food to Elias Thorne days before he fell ill." "I'm placing your son under arrest for the murder of Elias Thorne," Winters stated, turning back to Creed. "As for you, sir, you'll be accompanying us to Santa Fe to answer questions about your involvement in these illegal proceedings." Jed's control snapped completely. With a howl of rage, he drew his pistol and aimed it directly at Caleb. This is your fault." Caleb's hand dropped to his revolver. But before he could draw, a shot cracked across the yard. Jed jerked backward, his pistol firing harmlessly into the dirt as he fell. Blood bloomed on his chest. Caleb turned to see Kimmy standing at the corner of the house, her rifle still raised, wisps of smoke curling from its barrel. Her young face was set with grim determination, but her hands were steady. "The girl shot in self-defense," Winters declared officially after hearing accounts from multiple witnesses. In the quiet that followed, the ranch seemed to exhale. The danger was past. The final vow was kept. Weeks later, the rhythm of the ranch had settled. Caleb stayed, rebuilding fences, working the land, finding a quiet purpose. He and Narrow often sat on the porch at dusk. "You've changed," Narrow observed one evening, her dark eyes thoughtful, "less like a ghost walking through the world." "This place changes people," Caleb replied. "It changed me." Narrow nodded. "For the better, I think." It was a cold, crisp morning when the letter arrived. Caleb opened it on the porch. The handwriting was unfamiliar. "Dear Father, you don't know me, but I know of you through my late mother, Martha. My name is Thomas, and I am 10 years old. Mother's letters made it clear that you never knew of my existence, so I make no claim on you or your conscience. But I hope perhaps that we might correspond if nothing else. I remain respectfully yours, Thomas Rhodes, a son, a legacy he never knew he had." Narrow picked up the letter. "A son," she said quietly. "What will you do?" "I'll write to him," Caleb said, the decision forming as he spoke. "And I'll invite him here." He looked at Narrow, the beautiful, fierce native woman who had become his unexpected anchor. "If that's all right with you and your sisters, this is your home, after all." Narrow studied him for a long moment, a slow, deep smile softening her usually guarded features. "It's your home too, Caleb." She rose and took his hand, her touch surprisingly gentle, a silent promise of partnership, not an ending, but a new beginning. Months later, the land was green, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. Caleb, Narrow, Anya, and Kimi rode side by side toward Broken Creek. Today was the day Thomas would arrive. Caleb's gaze lingered on Narrow, her dark braid swinging against her shoulder. The unspoken love between them, forged in fire, and the terrible legacy of the past, felt more real, more lasting, than any passionate, fleeting romance. It was the deep, strong love of two broken souls who had found healing and purpose in each other, a true Wild West love story. As they crested the final rise, they paused, looking toward the distant horizon where the sun was beginning its slow descent. The open trail beckoned, a vast, wide land of freedom and healing. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was the beginning of an endless adventure. A life forged on honor, built on sacrifice, and redeemed by love. Their new family was unconventional, bound by justice and a cowboy love stories kind of commitment. The sun felt warm on his skin, the wind fresh in his face. It was a wide-open future. They nudged their horses forward, riding not toward a final destination, but simply riding into the horizon, the promise of a future, filled with hope and the freedom of the Wild West love they had fought for. Today's story is about pains that seemed to have no way out until a small ray of light changed everything. Do you believe that, even in the darkest times, there's always a miracle waiting at the end of the road? And if deep down you still believe that God is watching over you, quietly arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment, Amen, below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write it, a blessing may Apache woman begged its way into your life. Don't spend money on me. But the poor farmer gave his only gun. That was what the papers in the East said about a man who'd wasted his survival on a woman he barely knew. But the truth I lived through, was a damn sight harder, and the woman I found never begged a day in her life. She was a silent, unbroken storm. The auction in Los Seamus had already been going for an hour when Daniel Ward stepped into the market square. That was the story they told. My story, the one that broke what little spirit I had left, began later that same blistering summer in a hellhole called Dusk Ridge, Arizona, and I walked in not for seed, but for a tin of powder and a quiet end to my trail. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway, to keep more Wild West love stories coming. The dust in Dusk Ridge didn't just hang in the air. It felt like powdered rust, staining everything. It settled on the sweat-caked shirts of the miners, on the peeling paint of the saloon, and on my own worn-out boots as I stepped off the boardwalk. I wasn't there for trouble. At 65 years old, my trouble was behind me, buried deep under years of bad whiskey and the bitter taste of a promise broken and never forgotten. I needed powder for my old Sharps rifle. One last box, then maybe I'd ride up into the Mogollon Rim and find a place quiet enough to wait for the end. The shouting dragged me toward the center of the square. It wasn't the usual noise, not the drunken brawling or the high-pitched screams of a poker game gone sour. This was the slick, oily sound of commerce, twisting something human into a ledger entry. Beside the assay office, a makeshift platform had been thrown together. On it stood a man whose face was too fat for his collar, sweat glistening on his shaved head. Bartholomew Bart Gunn, the auctioneer, a man who traded in human desperation. And beside him stood Hare. She was Apache. Not just a woman, but a shadow carved from the canyons of the Southwest, her skin the color of desert clay at sunset. She wore nothing but tattered buckskin, and the rope binding her wrists to the rail was a thick, cheap thing, already cutting into her flesh. The sun beat down, turning the dust around her feet into shimmering heat. The crowd of men below miners, shiftless cowboys, and the kind of low-life scum that Dusk Ridge attracted were yelling obscenities, pointing, their faces flushed with greed and something darker. But she wasn't crying. She held her head high, the dark curtain of her hair falling over one shoulder. Her jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle working beneath her skin. Her eyes, when she lifted them, weren't glassed over with tears or fear. They were like obsidian chips, sharp, unflinching, and filled with a cold, terrifying contempt. She refused to give them the release of her pain. I stopped dead in my tracks. The auctioneer, Bart Gunn, was shouting, "Look at the spirit, unbroken, strong enough to work, strong enough to warm. Who'll give me $100, gentlemen? $100 for this piece of prime desert property." The bidding was slow, cruel, focused on breaking her pride. Each dollar was a cut, a reminder that her freedom was less valuable than a good pack mule. The woman, I heard someone hiss her name, Sita, Daystar. The crowd laughed at the name, but to me, it felt like a silent, terrible indictment. I didn't care about the powder, or the end, or my own meager future. My problem wasn't survival, it was the past. For 15 long years, I'd carried the face of Corporal Finn with me. Finn, my young rider, who died in the Apache Wars protecting a patch of desert he never knew, whispering a desperate plea as he bled out, "Promise me, Jake. Promise me you'll remember why we fight. Not for the gold, but for the decency. Don't let my death be for nothing." Decency. The word felt like a lie in this sun-baked square. But when I saw the absolute refusal in her eyes, the dignity she clung to, I heard Finn's voice like a bullet to the chest. My hand went to my side, touching the smooth, cold handle of my single possession of worth, the Colt Peacemaker, a presentation model with a silver engraving Finn's gun, given to me before he fell. It was all I had left of my honor, all I had left of the man I used to be. It was my sole retirement fund, my final defense against a lawless world. Bart Gunn slammed his hand on the platform. $75. Last call at 75. Going once, going twice. My hand rose, slow, stiff with years of arthritis and regret. $100. The voice was mine, but it sounded alien, ragged. The crowd went silent, then erupted in a wave of mockery and disbelief. I was Jake Barlow, the dried-up relic who lived like a hermit, too poor to afford a decent meal, and I'd just thrown down the value of my entire life. "Look at the old fool, buying trouble with his pension," someone yelled, their laughter harsh and cruel. Bart Gunn's grin widened, revealing a gold tooth. He saw the quality of the gun in my holster, even if he didn't recognize the old man standing there. A gentleman's bid. Jake Barlow, going for the $100 to the cowboy with the shiny iron. I kept my eyes on Sita. She finally looked directly at me. Her obsidian gaze didn't hold gratitude. It held a terrible, quiet warning. Her lips barely moved, a whispered sound lost in the wind. "Why? Don't spend your survival on me." I didn't answer. Honor wasn't a word you spoke out loud. It was something you did, even if it meant your ruin. I drew the Colt Peacemaker from my holster and laid it on the auction block, the silver glinting in the sun, a reflection of my broken oath. "The gun," I said, my voice hoarse. "It's worth more than the 100. The difference buys the rope off her wrists and keeps your filthy hands off her." The silence returned, deeper this time. A presentation Colt Peacemaker was the ultimate sacrifice of a man whose only value lay in his ability to fight. I was trading my life for hers. A shadow fell over the platform. Sheriff Marcus Thorne, a mountain of fat and malice, detached himself from the saloon doorway and strolled over, his star badge gleaming like a lie. Thorne ran Dusk Ridge like a wolf runs a sheep pen. He stopped beside Gunn, looking down at the weapon, then at me. "That's a fine piece," Barlow, Thorne drawled, chewing on a wad of tobacco. "You sure you want to trade your livelihood for this?" "Squaw, the value is not equal, and the market is rigged, Jake." "The deal is done, Sheriff," I said, my gaze steady. "The property is bought. My right. Or is your law weaker than a piece of paper, Thorne?" Thorne smiled, a cold, reptilian expression. "The law is flexible in Dusk Ridge, Jake, but I'll take the gun, and you'll remember who runs the law around here. This isn't over." He picked up the Colt, turning it in his massive hand, his eyes savoring the weight of the silver. Then, with a curt nod to Gunn, the deal was sealed. Gunn sliced the rope from Sita's wrists with a rusty knife. The rope fell away to leave angry red welts across her dark skin. "Get off the block, woman," Gunn sneered. Sita didn't move fast. She stepped down from the platform with the same cold dignity she'd held throughout the ordeal, not stumbling, despite her bare feet hitting the rough dirt. She walked straight past the auctioneer and the sheriff, her eyes fixed only on me. I pulled off my heavy duster, the only good coat I owned, and wrapped it around her shoulders, covering the tattered buckskin and the raw rope burns. I didn't touch her, only nodded toward the dusty trail leading out of town. "We ride," I said. She followed. Her silence was louder than the jeers and the low, cruel laughter that rose from the crowd. I heard the whispers. "Old fool's bought his own death warrant. She's Apache trouble. Thorne will come for them both." I didn't turn back. I had traded my gun for a woman's freedom, and my survival for a fragment of my honor. The emptiness in my holster was cold, a stark reminder of the sacrifice. But when I felt her shadow fall into step behind me, the weight on my chest, the suffocating weight of my long-held regret lifted, just enough to let me breathe. We walked toward the waiting, worn-out gelding, and the silence between us stretched, not with fear, but with a tension that felt like the cocking of a rifle ready for whatever came next. "Bốn, viết đoạn 21.300 chữ." We rode out of Dusk Ridge on that tired old horse, the silence between us so brittle it felt like dried river stone. My holster was empty, and the only sound was the jingle of the bit and the soft shuffle of Sita's bare feet, where she sometimes touched the ground as we walked. She sat behind me, holding the back of the saddle, the duster wrapped tight. I kept my eyes on the trail that wounded through the dry scrub and low, red rock formations. I didn't ask her name again, didn't ask her story. She was a debt paid, an act of honor, and that was all I needed to know. The rest was hers to offer or to keep. My cabin was a shack, 3 miles out, not a home, but a place where a man could wait for winter and his own quiet demise. It stood against the horizon, rough logs, a patched roof, and fields that had yielded nothing but stones and bitter dust for 5 years. When we reached it, the sun was sinking, painting the sky in colors too beautiful for the ugly world beneath it. "This is your place?" she asked, her voice low, a dry whisper, the first word she'd spoken to me since the block. "What's left of it," I admitted, swinging down. I offered my hand. She hesitated, her eyes scanning my face, searching for a lie, for a catch, for the expectation of payment. The look was not one of fear, but of profound distrust, earned from years of betrayal. Her palm, when she finally laid it in mine, was rough, yet small, and I felt the faint ridges of the rope burns. I only guided her to the ground. My hand was steady, scarred from years of work, offering only a single, silent promise: safety. Inside, the cabin was as bare as my life, a narrow cot, a rusted stove, and a few tins of beans and coffee. I pointed to the cot. "You rest. Tomorrow, we work." Simple words. A command born of the old-school man I still tried to be. She didn't take the bed. She sat on the floor, huddled near the cold stove, my coat still around her. She was a wild thing, brought into a cage, and she didn't know yet whether the bars were steel or shadow. I lay on the cot, the cold emptiness of the leather holster still a phantom weight on my hip, listening to her quiet, steady breathing. And for the first time since Finn died, the silence wasn't all mine. The next morning, work began. I went for water. She followed, never more than 10 feet behind me. I split wood. She stacked it with a meticulous, careful motion that showed deep respect for the resource. I saw the blisters rise on her hands, but she didn't complain, didn't stop. She worked like someone who knew that labor was the only path to earned rest. I found an old pair of boots for her, too big, but better than the cold ground. She accepted them with a slight nod. No thanks needed, the transaction complete. Days melted into a week. The tension between us was a third body in the room, unspoken, demanding respect. I never asked about the river where she was taken, never asked about her people. I only watched her hands, which were quick and strong, repairing a strap on the old mule's harness with fine stitches that shamed my own rough leatherwork. I knew then, with the quiet conviction of an old man, that I hadn't bought a slave. I'd found a partner. The false sense of victory, the belief that the matter was settled once I rode out of Dusk Ridge, shattered on the 10th night. It was just past midnight. The moon was a sliver of silver light over the desolate landscape. I woke not to noise, but to the scent of wood smoke and whiskey. Sita was already awake, standing by the window, a dark silhouette against the pale light, her silence warning me before the dogs did. 3 riders, Thorne's men. I moved to the door, pulling my old hunting knife from my boot. Without the Colt, I was a scarecrow with a piece of steel. "Sheriff Thorne sends his regards. Barlow," a voice snarled from the darkness. It was Dusty, a known gun hand and a bully in Dusk Ridge. "He says you bought that squaw with stolen property. The gun was never yours to trade. He wants the girl back, or he wants $500 for the inconvenience." $500. It might as well have been 5,000. They weren't looking for money. They were looking for a chance to take her and settle the score with the old man who had dared challenge the order of their town. They were the complication I hadn't foreseen. I stepped out, into the light, thrown by a half-full moon. The wind was cold. "She's not going anywhere," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the cold dread in my gut. "That's the law, old man." Dusty laughed, drawing a pistol. "The law says property stays with the strong. You broke the law of the Wild West the second you spent that silver." They threw a torch at the corner of my lean-to. The dry wood caught instantly, sending flames licking into the night. I charged, knowing I was already beaten. I slashed at the nearest horse, forcing it to rear, buying a second of chaos. Dusty fired, the bullet tearing through the air where my head had been moments before. I was an old man, and without my gun, my dignity was all I had left. I fought like an animal, not for victory, but for a good, clean fight. My knife found skin, but their pistol butts found bone. I was beaten down, my ribs protesting, my arm gashed by a stray bullet. They weren't trying to kill me, not yet. They wanted to make a point. As they rode away, shouting that they'd be back with Thorn himself, I was left lying in the dust, the scent of burning wood and shame heavy in the air. The lean-to was lost, but the cabin stood. Sita helped me inside, her movements quick and efficient, binding my wounds with strips of